This is my true story. I worked my whole life to raise my only son. I gave him food, clothes, and a roof above his head. I thought when I grew old, he would give me respect in return. But on my birthday, while the cake was still on the table, he spit on my face and kicked me like I was trash. The pain broke my heart, but not my silence. You won't believe what I did next. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so more people can hear my story. I was not born into comfort. My childhood was filled with storms, hunger, and long nights of working with my bare hands just to eat. When my son was born, I promised myself one thing: he would never feel the pain I felt. I worked through sickness, through cold winters, through heat that burned my back. I carried bricks, shoveled dirt, and built houses for other families so I could build a future for my own. Every coin I earned, I thought of him first. Every ache in my bones, I told myself it was for his tomorrow. I went without meals so he could eat full plates. I wore old shoes so he could wear new ones. I never celebrated my own birthdays, but I made sure his birthdays were full of balloons, cakes, and gifts. The smile on his face was my reward. I told myself, one day, when I am old and weak, he will take care of me like I took care of him. That belief kept me alive through the hardest storms. I paid for his school fees when the bills nearly crushed me. I worked extra hours so he could have books, pens, uniforms, and the best chances at life. When he wanted toys, I bought them. When he wanted fancy clothes, I gave him mine so he could look like the other children. Even when his mother told me to slow down, I did not. I said, no, he is my only son. He deserves everything I never had. I saved nothing for myself. Every coin, every hour, every ounce of my life was given to him. When he grew older, he wanted more. He wanted new phones, expensive shoes, trips with his friends. I told myself, this is what a father does. A father sacrifices. I worked until my hands bled and my knees broke. Even when I came home coughing blood, I told myself I had to keep going, because he needed me. Every birthday of his was celebrated like a festival. I made sure the house was filled with food, music, and guests. I wanted him to feel proud to have me as a father. I wanted him to stand tall in front of others and say, that is my father. He gave me everything I thought my reward would be: respect in my old age. I thought my gray hair would mean peace. I even gave him the house I built with my own hands. I put his name on the papers. I thought it would secure his future. I thought it would make him love me more. But I did not know what it really did. It made him feel powerful. It made him forget who built it. He walked in those walls as if I was a guest. He spoke to me as if I was a burden. But still, I kept quiet. I told myself, he is my son. He will change. He will remember one day all that I gave up for him. I did not know then that my silence was feeding his arrogance. I sat in the same chair for years, watching him grow from a boy into a man. Every time he walked past me without looking, I still smiled. Every time he spoke with sharp words, I still answered gently. I convinced myself that his stress from work, his troubles with life, were making him hard. I believed that one day he would look at me, see my weak hands, and feel the same love I once poured into his small hands when he was a child. I thought one day he would sit with me, hold my shoulder, and say, thank you, Father. I see everything you did for me. But that day never came. Instead, I carried the weight of his coldness like I once carried bricks on my back. The difference was, bricks never insulted me, storms never spit on me, hunger never called me useless. My son did. And still, I stayed. Still, I cooked for him. Still, I cleaned the house. Still, I paid the bills when he was late. Still, I gave him money when he asked. My neighbors praised him as a man, but I knew the truth. Without me, he was nothing. But with me, he had everything. And that was my mistake, because sacrifice without respect is slavery. And I had turned myself into a slave, not for strangers, not for neighbors, but for my own blood, my only son, the one I thought would be my shelter in my last years. The one I thought would stand by me on my birthdays, light my candles, and say, "Happy birthday, Father." Instead, he would spit. Instead, he would kick. And in that moment, every sacrifice I made turned into ashes. Every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every bone I broke working for him meant nothing. It was all erased with one cruel act. But before that day came, I still lived with hope. I lived in the prison of my own sacrifice. I told myself every morning, maybe today he will change. Maybe today he will remember, and that lie kept me alive. That lie kept me waiting for respect that never came. The cruelty did not come all at once. It arrived in small pieces, like drops of poison in a cup of water. At first I told myself it was nothing. A sharp word here, a careless tone there. But slowly, those drops filled the cup, and one day I found myself drinking poison every day under my own roof. My son began by snapping at small requests. If I asked him to bring me a glass of water, he sighed loudly, as if I had demanded gold. If I asked him to fix the bulb or help with the groceries, he rolled his eyes, muttering that I was useless. I thought maybe he was tired, maybe he was stressed. I told myself not to take it to heart. I said, he is still young. Young men are quick with anger, but they soften with time. I waited for softness, but all I received was stone. He called me a burden more than once. The first time, my ears could not believe it. We were sitting at dinner, and I accidentally dropped a spoon. My hands trembled, old as they are. Instead of picking it up or brushing it off, he glared at me and said, "Why are you even here? You are just a burden in this house." I froze. My chest felt hollow. The food in my mouth turned to dust. I wanted to speak, to remind him that this house was mine, that every brick and every tile came from my sweat. But the words stayed trapped in my throat. I looked at him, and I saw not a son, but a stranger with my blood in his veins. I swallowed my pain. I told myself maybe tomorrow he would regret it. But tomorrow came, and he acted as if nothing happened. Mockery became his language. When my hands shook while pouring tea, he laughed in front of his friends. He imitated my trembling, shaking his hands like a clown, and they all laughed with him. My face burned with shame. These same hands once carried him when he could not walk. These hands once held him steady when he was learning to ride a bicycle. Now they were his joke. But I stayed silent. I thought my silence was dignity, but it was weakness in his eyes. The cruelty grew sharper as years passed. He began raising his voice over small things. If I sat in the wrong chair, he shouted. If I forgot to switch off the light, he cursed. If I asked for help opening a jar, he slammed it on the table and said, "Can't you do anything by yourself?" My ears heard every insult, but my heart tried to erase them. I told myself, maybe he does not mean it. Maybe inside, he still loves me, but love is not hidden in spit and curses. Love does not call you worthless. Neighbors noticed the way he spoke to me. Once, when we were outside, I accidentally walked too slowly. He barked at me, "Hurry up, old man." A neighbor looked at me with pity, and that was worse than the insult itself. To be pitied for the way your own blood treats you is the deepest cut of all. I lowered my eyes and kept walking, as if I did not hear. Inside, I was bleeding. The first time he raised his hand at me was not with a slap, not with a fist, but with a shove. I asked him to turn down the music late at night. He pushed me back into my chair and said, "Stay out of my way." My body shook, not from the shove, but from the realization that respect had died in my house. Still, I did nothing. Still, I told myself to be patient. I thought, maybe it is my fault. Maybe I expect too much. That is what parents do. We blame ourselves for the sins of our children. But the signs were too many. He no longer greeted me in the mornings. He no longer asked if I had eaten. On birthdays, he gave no card, no cake. On Father's Day, he laughed and said, "You don't need a gift. You already have me." His words were daggers wrapped in smiles. The young boy who once ran into my arms now walked past me as if I were furniture. I was alive, but in his eyes, I was invisible. Each insult chipped away at my spirit, but I still clung to hope. I remembered the times he was small, when he held my finger to cross the street. I remembered when he fell sick and I stayed up all night cooling his fever. I told myself those memories meant something to him too. But maybe they did not. Maybe they were erased from his mind, replaced by arrogance and pride. My memories were treasures. To him, they were nothing. That was the first cruelty, not the spit, not the kick, but the slow killing of respect. It is one thing to be hurt in one moment of anger. It is another to be hurt every day by words, looks, and silence. It is a slow poison. And I drank it, thinking one day it would stop. I thought my patience would heal him. But instead, my patience fed his cruelty. By staying silent, I gave him permission. And that permission led to the darkest day of my life, the day my own son spit on me on my birthday. My birthday came like any other day. I did not expect gifts. I did not expect songs. All I wanted was peace, a little kindness, maybe a word of love from the son I gave my whole life to. The table was set. A small cake with candles stood in the middle. Some relatives were there, sitting stiff, watching. I sat in the corner, waiting for a smile, waiting for a voice to say, "Happy birthday, Father." But that voice never came. Instead, my son walked in with his usual scowl. His eyes did not see me as a father. They saw me as a weight, a shadow, a piece of old furniture in his house. When the candles were lit, the room was quiet. No one dared sing. The flame flickered against my face as if mocking me, reminding me that even fire burns out with time. My son looked at me, and instead of respect, his lips curled in disgust. He leaned close, and in front of everyone he spit on me. Warm spit dripped down my cheek, sliding slowly onto my shirt. I froze. My heart did not beat. My body did not move. I could hear my own breathing, broken, shallow, as if the air had turned heavy. I thought I would faint from the shame. The man I raised, the boy I carried, the son I loved. He spit on me as if I were dirt. But it did not end there. As I tried to wipe my face, he stood tall and kicked me hard in the ribs. Pain shot through my chest. My chair rattled, my body bent. I clutched the table to steady myself, but the cake shook and the candles trembled. Gasps filled the room. Relatives looked away, ashamed, afraid. No one stood up for me. No one said a word. It was my birthday, but it felt like my funeral. A funeral of dignity. A funeral of respect. Everything I built, everything I sacrificed, buried in that moment under spit and pain. He looked down at me and said coldly, "You should be grateful I even let you stay here. Without me, you would be on the street." Those words cut deeper than the kick. Grateful? Grateful to live in the house I built with my blood? Grateful to eat food bought with my money? Grateful to breathe air in a place that only exists because I worked like a mule for decades? I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream the truth into his face, but my throat was locked. My voice was gone. Silence was all I had. The candles on the cake melted while I sat there, spit drying on my cheek, ribs aching with every breath. No one touched the cake. No one sang. The room was filled with whispers, with shame, with eyes that could not meet mine. I sat there like a broken statue, alive but lifeless. My birthday, the day I should have felt love, became the day I realized love was dead in my house. My son stood proud, chest out, eyes burning with arrogance. He thought he had crushed me. He thought he had proved his power. But inside me, something shifted. My heart broke, yes, but my spirit began to harden. I had endured insults. I had endured mockery. I had endured silence. But spit and a kick on my birthday was the final act, the final nail in the coffin of patience. He thought he had humiliated me forever. He thought I would sit there, small, broken, begging for his forgiveness. But he forgot one thing. He forgot the power I still held. He forgot that the house, the car, the accounts, the very life he stood on, existed because of me. He forgot that keys open doors, but they also close them. As I sat there, ribs aching, I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not shout. I would not curse him. My revenge would not be loud. It would be silent. Silent and final. He spit on me and kicked me in front of everyone, thinking I was powerless. But he would wake one morning and find that power had never left my hands. He would see that the man he called useless was the very man who held the keys to everything he thought was his. My silence was no longer weakness. My silence had turned into fire. And that fire would burn quietly, leaving nothing behind for him but ashes of regret. That night, as the candles burned out and the cake collapsed into itself, I sat in the darkness of my room, holding my ribs, replaying his spit dripping down my face. I swore to myself that I would never celebrate another birthday under his roof. I swore that the next sunrise would not find me as his victim, but as his ghost. A ghost who left quietly but took everything with him. He had spit on my dignity. He had kicked my body. But he had forgotten my silence could carry more power than his violence ever would. And with that thought, I began to plan my departure. I sat there long after the guests had left. The cake was still on the table, the wax from the candles hardened into small rivers of white. My cheek was sticky with spit, my ribs still throbbing from the kick. I touched my chest and felt the bruise swelling beneath my shirt. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the wound in my heart. My birthday had always been a quiet day, but I never imagined it would become a stage for humiliation. I was a father, a man who had carried his family through storms, but that night I was reduced to nothing more than a beaten old man sitting in silence while the world looked away. The same day I once celebrated my son's life had turned into the funeral of my dignity. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I wanted to shout, but no words left my lips. Instead, I sat in silence, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Every inhale was pain. Every exhale was shame. I could still hear his voice echoing in my head. "You should be grateful I let you stay here." Those words spun like knives in my chest. Grateful? Grateful to the same boy I raised with my bare hands? Grateful to the same man who slept in the bed I bought, under the roof I built, eating food I paid for? My silence felt like chains binding me to a chair. I did not speak, but inside me something cracked open. That night, humiliation pressed on me like a heavy stone. I replayed the moment over and over, his spit falling, his kick landing, his eyes filled with contempt. The silence in the room was louder than any scream. Not one guest stood up for me. Not one relative put a hand on my shoulder. They looked down. They looked away. They acted as though my humiliation was invisible. But I knew they saw it. They saw everything. And by their silence, they buried me even deeper. The humiliation was not just his cruelty. It was the silence of everyone who allowed it. But slowly, that silence began to change. It was no longer just chains. It became a fire burning low in my chest. I realized my silence was not weakness anymore. My silence was power. Power to observe. Power to decide. Power to plan. He thought his spit stripped me of dignity, but it only stripped me of illusions. He thought his kick broke me, but it only broke my patience. That night, sitting with spit drying on my cheek, I began to understand that my silence would be my weapon. Not shouts, not curses. Silence. I walked to my room and looked at the mirror. My face was old, lined, tired. But behind my eyes there was still fire. The same fire that carried me through poverty, through storms, through endless years of labor. I remembered every day I worked with bleeding hands just to put food on his plate. I remembered the times I went hungry so he could eat. I remembered the nights I coughed blood but still woke up before sunrise to go to work. And now the same boy I saved had spit on me. The humiliation did not erase my sacrifices. It only made me see them more clearly. And the more I remembered, the more I knew the truth. I was not powerless. He was. For hours, I lay awake listening to the silence of the house. He slept comfortably in the room I built for him. He rested under blankets I had bought. He thought the house was his kingdom. But he forgot one thing. Kingship comes not from words, but from keys. And the keys were still in my hands. He did not know that the very man he spat on still controlled the doors of his life. That was the night my humiliation turned into resolve. That was the night I promised myself, I will not shout, I will not fight, I will leave. But when I leave, I will take everything with me. Humiliation can destroy a man, or it can rebuild him. My son thought he destroyed me with spit and kicks, but he rebuilt me into someone colder, someone harder, someone ready to walk away forever. On the day he humiliated me most, I began to see my freedom. And that freedom would come in silence. He thought when he spit on me, when he kicked me in front of family, that I was nothing. He thought he stripped me of the last bit of pride in my body. He thought he left me broken, humiliated, and powerless. But in his arrogance, he forgot the truth. He forgot that the life he stands on was built by my hands. He forgot that the house he sleeps in came from my sweat. He forgot that the car he drives, the bills he pays, the very food he eats is tied to me. He thought spit erased my name. He thought a kick broke my back. But power does not vanish because of disrespect. Power rests in silence, in paper, in keys, and I still held them all. I looked at the keys on the table that night. They looked simple, nothing but pieces of metal shaped to fit locks. But to me, they were more than metal. They were symbols of what I had built. Keys to the house, keys to the car, keys to the bank lockers where my savings still slept. Each key reminded me that I was not the beggar he called me. I was the builder. I was the provider. I was the man who carried the weight of generations. Without me, he would be on the street. Without me, his arrogance would collapse. He thought I was weak because my hands trembled. But even trembling hands can hold keys strong enough to lock every door in his life. He laughed at me when I asked for water. He mocked me when my hands shook. He told me I should be grateful he let me stay. But he forgot the truth. The papers of the house still bore my name. The accounts still bore my signature. The car registration was still under me. He strutted in arrogance, thinking he was the master of this place, but he was living in shadows of what I built. He spat on me as if I was dirt, but it was my sweat that cemented the walls around him. He kicked me like trash, but it was my money that bought the floor beneath his feet. He thought power was his voice. He thought power was his cruelty. But real power was silent, patient, waiting in the keys I still carried. I sat that night, ribs aching, cheeks sticky, and I stared at those keys. They looked back at me like old friends, reminding me of who I really was. They whispered to me that silence could cut deeper than words. They told me that I did not need to fight him with fists or shouts. I could fight him with absence. I could fight him by leaving, but not empty-handed. No, I would leave with every key, every lock, every chain. He would wake up and realize his cruelty had unlocked his own ruin. My son thought I was trapped in his house, but in truth, he was trapped in mine. He thought I was living off him, but in truth, he was still living off me. He thought he owned me by feeding me scraps, but in truth, every bite he ate came from the wealth I built. He thought I was powerless because I was old, but in truth, I was more powerful than him because I had built a life he could never build alone. He thought spit erased all of that, but spit dries. Keys endure. I remembered every insult, every shove, every cruel laugh. But more than that, I remembered the papers I signed, the accounts I opened, the house I paid for brick by brick. I remembered the nights I worked extra hours just to ensure he had a home. He thought he could erase me with humiliation, but he had only reminded me of what was still mine. The more I thought, the clearer it became. My silence was not defeat. My silence was the sound of chains breaking, and in those keys I still held his fate. That night my humiliation turned into power, my pain turned into clarity. He thought I was useless, but I was still the man with the keys, and with those keys I would make my final move. That night I sat alone in my room, ribs aching, the echo of his spit and kick still burning in my memory. The house was silent, but in that silence, I heard everything. I heard every insult he had thrown at me. I heard every laugh he made when my hands trembled. I heard the sound of his voice saying I should be grateful he let me stay. And with every sound that came back to me, my heart grew heavier, but my resolve grew harder. For years, I told myself patience would heal him. For years, I swallowed my pain and hoped that one day he would change. But the spit on my face showed me the truth. He would never change. He had buried respect so deep inside himself that even blood could not bring it out. That night, my patience ended. That night, I decided I would not live as a slave in my own house anymore. I looked at the keys again, lying on the table, glinting faintly under the weak bulb of my room. They were not just metal. They were reminders that I was not helpless. They were proof that power was still in my hands. He thought he broke me with spit and kicks. He thought he had won. But what he did not know was that he had awakened something in me. He had awakened the fire of a father who had given everything and finally realized he owed nothing more. I thought of all the years I worked, the storms I walked through, the hunger I endured, the sickness I ignored. All for him. And this was my reward. Spit, a kick, and words that cut deeper than knives. If that was his love, then I wanted no part of it anymore. My decision was made. I would leave. I would walk out of the same house I built, not in defeat, but in silence. I would not beg for space in the home my sweat paid for. I would not explain myself to the same man who called me worthless. I would not shout or fight or argue. I would do the one thing he would never expect. I would vanish from his life, but not empty-handed. I would take everything with me. The house, the car, the accounts, the keys, all the things he took for granted. He thought he owned them. He thought he owned me. But he forgot that nothing in his life was truly his. Everything he had came from me. And I was done letting him enjoy it while he humiliated me. My decision was not born of anger. It was born of clarity. Anger burns fast. Clarity lasts. I knew if I stayed, he would spit again. He would kick again. He would insult again. He would keep pushing until one day I was too broken to rise. But if I left, if I walked out with silence and strength, he would feel the weight of his own cruelty. He would wake one day and see that the father he mocked was the father who held the roof above his head. And by then, it would be too late. He would have nothing. And I would have peace. That night my ribs throbbed, my body weak, but my spirit was steady. For the first time in years, I felt stronger than him. Stronger not because of youth or muscles, but because of resolve. I knew what I had to do. I would gather the keys. I would make no announcement. I would leave without a word. Silence would be my revenge. Silence would be my justice. Silence would be the answer to his spit and his kick. He thought he had silenced me by humiliating me, but I would show him the truth. True silence is not weakness. True silence is a decision. And mine was final. When I blew out the candle in my room that night, I did not just end another day. I ended years of patience, years of humiliation, years of waiting for a son who would never come back to me. My decision was sealed in that darkness. Tomorrow, I would not be his victim. Tomorrow, I would be gone. The house was silent when I rose from my bed. My ribs still ached from the kick, and the spit that had dried on my shirt was a stain I could not wash from my soul. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. My decision was made, and all I needed now was to act. I looked again at the table where the keys lay. They were small, simple pieces of metal, but in their shape rested the story of my life. Each key was a part of me. The house key, heavy and worn from decades of use, reminded me of the nights I built walls with blistered hands. The car key, scratched but strong, reminded me of the endless trips to work, bringing back money for food and bills. The locker key, small but solid, reminded me of the savings I built over a lifetime of sacrifice. To anyone else, they were just objects. To me, they were power, silent, patient power. And now, they would become my revenge. I picked them up one by one, pressing them into my palm. The cold bite of the metal against my skin reminded me that I was still alive, still in control. My son thought he had stripped me of everything. He thought spit erased my dignity. He thought a kick shattered my pride. But these keys proved he was wrong. These keys whispered to me that the life he boasted about, the life he thought he owned, was still mine. He walked around that house like a king, but a king without keys is just a beggar in disguise. He forgot who held them. He forgot who built the kingdom. And now he would remember, but only when it was too late. I did not storm into his room. I did not shout his name. I did not throw insults back at him. I moved in silence. My footsteps were soft, but each one carried the weight of decades of sacrifice. I went from room to room, collecting what was mine, the documents, the papers, the accounts, quietly, carefully, with no sound. The same silence he mistook for weakness was now my greatest strength. He slept in his bed, snoring, dreaming, while I prepared the reality that would wake him in ruin. He thought he had broken me, but while he dreamed, I gathered the tools to break him. I slipped the keys into my pocket and felt their weight against my thigh. They were not heavy, but they felt like iron chains. Chains not binding me, but binding him. He thought I was his prisoner. He thought I lived under his mercy. But those keys meant freedom for me and chains for him. He would wake to find doors locked, accounts emptied, locks changed. He would wake to realize that his cruelty had cost him everything. I did not need to raise my hand. I did not need to curse. The keys would speak louder than my voice ever could. That night, as I stood in the quiet, I remembered the moment he spit on me. The way it dripped down my cheek. The way everyone stayed silent. The way he kicked me as if I were dirt. That moment was his weapon. These keys would be mine. His weapon humiliated me. My weapon would erase him. And the beauty of it all was in the silence. He shouted. He cursed. He kicked. But I did not need to. I would lock every door with calm hands. I would close every account with a steady pen. My revenge would not come in noise. It would come in silence. Cold, final, unforgiving. I looked around the house one last time. The walls I had painted. The floor I had repaired. The furniture I had bought. Everything was mine, even if he pretended it was his. He thought a father's age made him powerless, but he forgot that power is not in youth. Power is in ownership. Power is in control. Power is in the quiet strength of a man who knows what is his and decides when to take it back. And with those keys in my pocket, I knew the truth. I still held everything, and he would soon hold nothing. The night I chose to leave was quiet, but inside me there was a storm. My ribs still ached when I breathed, and the spit stain on my shirt reminded me of the cruelty I endured. Yet in my pocket, the weight of the keys gave me strength. They reminded me that I was not walking out empty-handed. I was walking out with power, the same power my son forgot I still had. I rose from my chair slowly, each movement heavy, but my spirit lightened with every step toward the door. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from age. Yet even trembling hands can turn a key, can lock a door, can end a chapter. I looked around the house one last time. The walls carried my sweat. The floors carried my footsteps. The ceiling sheltered my family for decades. Every corner reminded me of the man I once was. Strong, hard-working, willing to sacrifice everything for my son's future. But those same walls had now witnessed my humiliation. They had heard his insults, his curses, his spit hitting my cheek. This house was no longer a home. It had become a prison of disrespect, and I refused to remain a prisoner one day longer. I took slow steps toward the front door. Each step echoed in my ears like a drumbeat of freedom. I could hear the silence of the house, broken only by my son's snoring in his room. He slept peacefully, never imagining that the man he mocked, the man he spat on, was about to vanish from his life forever. He would wake up to a house without me, to accounts without my name, to doors locked against him. He thought his cruelty had broken me. But when he awoke, he would discover his cruelty had only broken his own future. As I reached the door, I slipped the keys into my palm and held them tightly. They were cold, but they burned in my hand with meaning. These were not just keys to a house or a car. They were the keys to my revenge, my silence, my departure. I unlocked the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. The door creaked, but I welcomed the sound. To me, it was not a creak. It was a song of release, a song of freedom. I stepped outside, and the night air hit my face. For the first time in years, I breathed without chains on my chest. The stars above looked down, and I felt they were witnesses to my escape. I did not look back. I did not want to see the house that had turned into a cage. I walked forward, my steps steady, carrying sorrow in my heart, but power in my hands. The road was dark, but it felt brighter than the walls I had left behind. My ribs still hurt, but each step dulled the pain. Pain of the body fades, but pain of the soul stays. That night, I began to heal my soul. As I walked farther, I thought of the boy I once carried in my arms, the boy who had become the man who spit on me. I realized I was not leaving my son behind. My son was already gone. The boy I raised no longer existed. In his place stood a stranger with my blood, a stranger who saw me not as a father, but as a burden. I was not leaving him. I was leaving the ghost of what I once believed he was. I clutched the keys in my pocket and whispered to myself, "This is my revenge." Not with fire, not with shouts, but with silence. He would wake to find me gone, and in that silence, he would discover everything he lost. He would see the locks changed, the accounts emptied, the doors closed. He would realize that the man he thought powerless had taken back everything. My silence would speak louder than his insults. My departure would cut deeper than his spit. My absence would weigh heavier than his kick. That night I walked into the darkness not as a victim, but as a man reclaiming his dignity. For the first time in years, I felt free. I was no longer chained by his cruelty. I was no longer trapped by his arrogance. I was no longer silenced by his insults. My silence had become my voice, and it said one thing: I am done. I am gone. And I will never return. The morning after my departure was not quiet for him. He woke expecting to see me sitting in the corner chair, silent, waiting like always. He woke thinking I was still his servant, still his shadow, still his burden. But when his eyes opened, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the silence of my patience, but the silence of absence. My chair was empty, my bed was cold. The air in the house had changed. He walked through the rooms calling my name, but no answer came. He searched with arrogance still in his voice, shouting as if I owed him my presence. But his shouts met nothing but the walls, and the walls gave him nothing back. He tried the front door, and his surprise began. The locks did not open for him. His key, the one he thought made him master of the house, no longer fit. He rattled the handle, cursed under his breath, banged his fist against the wood. But the house did not open. The house he thought was his castle was closed to him. He searched the drawers, the shelves, the usual places for keys. But they were gone. He searched for the documents, the papers that proved ownership. But they were gone too. He rushed to his car, ready to drive off in anger. But when he turned the key, the engine stayed silent. He opened the hood, checked in confusion, but I had already taken what mattered. The car he bragged about to his friends was as lifeless as his pride. Then came the phone calls. He went to withdraw money from the accounts. Empty. He went to use the cards I once gave him access to. Declined. He ran through the house like a wild animal, screaming, slamming doors, but every corner reminded him of his mistake. Everything he had built his arrogance on, the house, the car, the money, was never his. It was mine. And now it was gone. His cruelty had unlocked his own collapse. Relatives began to whisper, the same ones who had seen him spit on me, the same ones who had turned their eyes away as he kicked me. They whispered now about his downfall. They asked, how could a man treat his father like that? How could he spit on the same man who gave him everything? His arrogance became his shame. His cruelty became his curse. He walked the streets with eyes watching him, not with respect, but with disgust. The whispers followed him everywhere. Not whispers of his strength, but whispers of his betrayal. He tried to tell them I had abandoned him. He tried to paint himself as the victim. But no one believed him. They had seen the spit. They had seen the kick. They had seen my silence. They knew the truth, even if they never spoke it aloud. And in their silence, he found no comfort. Only shame. His arrogance collapsed under the weight of his own actions. The son who once thought he was king was revealed as a fool. For me, I felt no joy in his ruin. Revenge is not joy. It is justice. And justice had finally been served. He had taken my dignity on my birthday, but I had taken everything he depended on in silence. He thought I was weak, but my departure proved he was the one who could not stand alone. Without me, his house was not a home. Without me, his life was not secure. Without me, his pride was not protection. He was left with nothing. Nothing but the memory of what he had done. And that was the true fallout. Not just empty accounts. Not just locked doors. Not just a car that would not move. The true fallout was the silence that haunted him. The silence of a father who had given everything and then walked away forever. The silence of a house that no longer opened to him. The silence of a man who realized too late that cruelty has a cost. That cost was his future, his comfort, his pride. When I walked away that night, I carried sorrow in my chest, but also freedom in my hands. For the first time in years, I was not bound by his insults or his cruelty. My silence was no longer weakness. It was strength. I had taken the keys, the documents, the accounts. I had left him with nothing but the echo of his own spit and the memory of his own kick. That was my justice. Not loud, not violent, silent, final, and complete. He thought he had destroyed me, but I had only transformed. I was no longer the father who begged for respect. I was the man who had walked away with dignity, leaving behind a son who would taste the ashes of his own arrogance. I found peace in places he never thought I would. I rented a small room, simple and quiet, with a chair by the window and light streaming through in the mornings. I no longer had a grand house, but I had something far greater: peace. Every morning, I breathed air that was free of insults. Every night, I closed my eyes knowing no spit would fall on me, no kick would bruise my ribs. The silence of my new life was not heavy like before. It was light, calm, healing. I cooked my own meals, ate in peace, and thanked God for every bite. Alone, yes, but not lonely. Loneliness is when you live surrounded by cruelty. Solitude is when you live surrounded by peace. And what of him? My son who mocked me? My son who kicked me? He was left with an empty house that no longer belonged to him. He was left with neighbors who whispered about his shame. He was left with relatives who looked at him not with respect, but with disgust. He was left with accounts drained, cars silenced, doors locked. He was left with nothing but the ghost of his cruelty. The man who once shouted, "You should be grateful I let you stay here," was now the one abandoned, left begging, left explaining to others why his father had walked out and taken everything with him. His arrogance had turned to dust. His cruelty had turned to chains around his own neck. That was my justice. I did not need to see his downfall to feel it. I did not need to watch him cry or beg. My silence had already done the work. He would wake every day in that empty space and remember what he had done. He would sit in the chair where I once sat, and he would see it empty. He would look at the cake he had ruined with spit and kicks, and he would see no candles lit. He would realize he had destroyed the one man who gave him everything. That realization would haunt him longer than any punishment I could give. My justice was not in his suffering. My justice was in my freedom. I built my life with sacrifice, and I rebuilt my ending with silence. I no longer feared his words. I no longer feared his violence. I had walked out forever, and in that walk, I carried my dignity back into my hands. My son lost a father that night, but I did not lose myself. I found myself again. The man who worked through storms, who built walls with bare hands, who carried bricks and carried dreams, he had returned. And in that return I felt stronger than ever before. Final thought. On my birthday, he spit on me and kicked me. He thought he buried me in humiliation. But I took the keys, I took the silence, and I walked out forever. And in that silence, I found my justice.